Hello and welcome to the Mobalytics patch 11.18 tier list. Once again, I'm Dan Aux Harrison. This is a massive patch with a ton of changes as it's a world patch. Ultimately, there is a lot of upward movement on this patch because the changes were aimed mostly at competitive. A lot of the nerfed champions like Renekton are much bigger threats at High-ELO and in pro play, and a bunch of the champions which were buffed were already good at lower ranks but underwhelming at higher tiers. So you can expect some surprising changes. Without further ado, let's jump straight in. First up is the top lane. In the God tier we have Tahm Kench, Nasus and Garen, and in the S tier we have Dr. Mundo, Lilia, Malphite, Ornn, Set, Tahm Kench, Urgot, Wukong and Yorick. Renekton has basically been removed from the game, with his signature and power stun being reduced in length. He wasn't too much of a threat in lower ranks anyway, but I wouldn't expect to see him at all on the new patch. Camille was toned down with a nerf to a shield cooldown. It's not massive as you can simply play around the slightly longer cooldown, but it definitely does hurt. Jace's base AD was toned down, guaranteeing he'll be a weaker pick in lower ranked games. Gangplank got some big buffs in terms of his base HP, but he was one of the lowest win rate tops at lower elos, so I don't think this is nearly enough to bring him back. Lilia also got some changes that were aimed at making her better in the jungle, but the longer Q stack duration change and the shorter E cooldown actually help her in top lane as well. Mundo got a big change on this patch. His ult, instead of instantly healing him, now grants him bonus HP. The reason this is major is it is no longer affected by grievous wounds. It also scales with effects that benefit from having more HP like Stoneplate, Grasp the Undying, Sunfire, and most importantly, his ultimate healing over time. They did lower this at higher ranks, but because of the bonus HP you're receiving, you'll still come out ahead overall. Mundo was already solid at lower ranks, being able to farm safely from a distance when needed with his Q and E, and scaling really well, but this change gives you a chunk of extra power. Singed received an easy to overlook change. When he pops his ultimate, he now applies grievous wounds with all of his damage. Singed often like to pick up a way to apply grievous wounds, and you may still late game to get the 60% offered by completed items, but ultimately this saves you spending 800 gold on an Oblivion Orb or Bramble Vest in the laning phase to shut down your opponent's healing and all-ins. In teamfights, being able to spread grievous wounds across a fight on top of your poison damage is super impactful. Urgot received a small buff to his Q with a lower cooldown and mana cost, but ultimately he was already doing well in the top lane, and this just helps him out more. Into a lot of melee matchups, he handles them well, being able to flip them and decimate them with his shotgun legs. He becomes super bulky, super fast, and when ahead can shred teams while also absorbing a ton of damage. Urgot's build path is a bit unique because getting a mythic isn't actually that much of a priority for him, and he much prefers Titanic to bolster his W damage. Onto the jungle. In the God tier we have Jarvan, Trundle and Amumu. In the S tier we have Echo, Fiddlesticks, Master Yi, Nocturne, Rammus, Skarner, Vi, Warwick and Zac. Amumu is doing amazing after the changes to his Q. Ultimately the compensation nerfs they gave him, and there were a bunch, weren't nearly enough and his already high win rate jumped even higher, definitely deserving of the God tier spot. Lee Sin had his base AD nerfed. It's not a nice change as it'll slightly lower your damage and clear in the early game, but it's not hugely substantial and so he hasn't moved. Dr. Mundo is looking to make a return in the jungle. He got some solid buffs to his kit that we talked about when discussing top laners, but his Q damage to jungle camps now has a massive buff, and his clear should be really powerful. Lilia got some solid buffs, more healing from camps, Q stacks stay for longer, and a lower E cooldown. She was already actually decent at lower ranks, but is now looking really promising. Kiana got some nice buffs, but ultimately she was never really that great at lower ranks in the jungle, even when she was strong. She's in C tier, which we don't feature in this video. We also saw rumble changes to help him ease back into the jungle, but again, not an ideal lower elo jungler, so don't expect to see him show up. Gragas wasn't directly changed, but the big switch up was the Predator buff. Gragas was always one of the stronger Predator abusers and one of the few champions to continue to use it even since it got pushed out. This change meant you ramp up to your maximum speed faster, and it's gone from 45% to 60%, which allows you to gap close on your target far quicker to land a big body slam cask engage. Gragas works well at peeling or finding engage angles and can do a lot of damage when ahead. In a similar vein to Gragas, Skarner loves the new Predator. Since Chemtank's nerf, he struggled to find a way to zoom around super fast and get on top of his opponents to ult, but with Predator looking far better, he'll easily be able to pick off targets and close the gap quickly. Skarner is quite ult reliant and you'll want to wait for your boots to be able to utilize Predator, but he still holds it pretty well in close range skirmishes thanks to the stun on his E and the stacking mechanic of his Q. Zed got a massive buff to his passive on jungle monsters. It actually already did a large amount of damage and they've doubled it. The reason this is substantial is Zed's passive has a 10-second cooldown on champions, but no cooldowns on monsters. His clear is ridiculously fast and it's an easy path to power farm and become super fed. You don't have hard CC for ganks, but your burst damage combined with gap closing ability means you can easily punish overextended or low HP enemies. We placed him in A tier for now, but could easily see him being above that on the patch. Onto the mid lane. In the God tier we have Graves, Malzahar and Annie. In the S tier we have Ahri, Akshan, Anivia, Irelia, Kayle, Lux and Zed. Karma got some decent buffs to her base armor and shield. On top of the previous changes to make her more of a poke mage, she definitely has more of a presence in the mid lane. Zoe got a huge buff to her E cooldown. It's such a powerful spell, and reducing the cooldown just opens up more and more windows to punish her opponents. Fizz had some interesting changes, less damage on his ult but more on hit damage on his W, and he takes less damage from auto attacks thanks to his passive. Ultimately it's hard to scope out exactly where this will land him, but it looks like in extended fights he'll fare even better than he currently is, and he won't be so reliant on connecting with his ultimate. Akshan is a monster at the moment. As people have learned to play him, he's been decimating in skirmishes and duels, and his passive revive means he's a constant frustration in the later stages as well. Kog'Maw also got a big buff to his EAP ratio. This is your go-to spell for AP Kog'Maw, so you may see him show up in your solo queue games. He's not exactly suited to the current meta, but if he gets to the late game he's an absolute monster. Talon got some minor changes on the patch. A bit lower damage in his Q, but more damage to jungle camps with his W. Not enough to take him into the jungle, but it does help mid lane Talon steal away camps, and particularly with Raptors you can easily do this and jump away. Talon's strength at the moment comes from his Bruiser build with Gore Drinker. You still do insane damage, but you're really bulky and hard to stick down and become a massive menace to the enemy team. Taliyah got some big changes on the patch. Workaround is now smaller, doesn't last as long, and when you Q on it you also refund half the cooldown while only costing 1 mana. This makes it so much easier to play out your lane. You'll be able to utilise Workaround more effectively for low mana poke, but you'll also have more space in the lane to fire off full power Qs. These changes could be more than enough to push you into the meta, as your ability to roam and one-shot targets when ahead are hard to deal with. You only got a buff to his W shielding. Instead of shielding for 25% more per target hit, it's now 50%. This change is only really going to impact teamfights or skirmishes with several people, but it's a solid change and he's performing pretty well at lower ranks. Laning can be a bit tricky at times depending on the matchup, but once you get rolling you're unstoppable. You can E in and basically solo kill someone with a guarantee you'll be pulled out again. Just be careful you don't leave it in a compromising position. Onto AD carries in the God tier, Misfortune, Ziggs and Vayne, and the S tier, Ashe, Draven, Jhin, Sivir and Swain. Ashe's nerfs limit her early power with a longer cooldown on the W. That being said, she maxes the W first and quickly powers through the nerfs, so she's still looking solid. Varus got pushed down to C tier with some nerfs to his passive and AD. Ultimately he was never the best low elo champ though. King's got some nice buffs to early mana cost on a Q. It'll help you push more in lane without burning through all your mana, but it's not hugely substantial, and as you max your Q it reverts back to its usual amount. Misfortune got a buff to the number of waves when she fires her ult. Essentially it's just a flat DPS increase as it's more waves in the same time. She's been a solid low elo pick already, and this just makes big wombo combos that much more devastating. Twitch got 10 extra AD on his ultimate. This adds up to a fair bit when you pop it and helps you all-ins, but ultimately Twitch still struggles from being bullied out in the laner phase in a range of matchups. Aphelios and Kalista were both nerfed to address their power and pro play, but neither show up on a list as they're both very underwhelming at lower ranks. Kai'Sa had an E cooldown reduced when maxed by 2 seconds. It's not a humongous change since it'll take till level 13 to fully come online, but with how strong her E is and the fact you lower the cooldown with autos, this makes the late game really powerful. Being able to go invisible more frequently makes you harder to pin down and allows you to play more aggressive. You'll still have some lane matchups which can bully you out early, but the payoff is even bigger mid to late game, and if you end up getting fed, then it's GG. I have no idea why they're buffing Draven. He's already a solo queue monster, but I guess they want to spice things up. Draven's ult now executes targets whose HP is below the number of his stacks after they take the initial damage. This is crazy, as one of the biggest downsides of Draven is when you're sitting on a lot of stacks, getting a kill is worth a lot, but you don't actually have any extra power to help you do so. You'll now be in a position where the more stacks you get, the more of a threat you are, and the more likely you are to be able to cash in. With 300 to 400 stacks combined with your ult damage, you can easily snipe targets and then enjoy the sweet rewards. If you're not a Draven player, ban it, and being serious, he is not going to be fun to play against on this patch. Onto support, in the God tier we have Zyra, Nami and Sona, and in the S tier we have Blitzcrank, Brand, Leona, Morgana, Soraka, Xerath and Zilean. Thresh got another nerf addressed at hampering his presence in pro play. We haven't moved him down another tier as it wasn't too major, but he's definitely not the God tier champ he was in lower ranks earlier in the season. Trundle had his pillar nerf pretty substantially to push him out the role and has dropped down to C tier. Yuumi got a buff to a passive and was already doing decently, and with this change has moved up and is looking pretty solid. Taliyah is an interesting one. It has a low play rate but is really successful with the players who pick it up. With the changes to her Q and passive, they make her vastly more powerful, and I think she's going to look pretty strong in the support role as you'll be able to harass a lot more frequently and easily. Karma got some solid buffs to her base armor and shield. These have a lot of value in the bot lane, as not only will you be tankier, but you'll keep your AD carrying yourself alive longer and in more scenarios. 10 extra shielding doesn't sound like much, but over the course of a laning phase, you'll use it a lot and get a lot out of it. Now, a big thing I need to address is build path. A lot of people are still building Karma as an enchanter with Shirelias, and there's definitely a time and place for that, but I personally think she's much better as a poke mage since her changes. With Mandate and Sork Shoes, your damage is insane with a Mantra Q, and the cooldown resets super fast even early in the game if you hit multiple targets. Karma's win rate is quite a bit higher with Mandate compared to other mythics, so I strongly recommend if you go into picker you build her this way, otherwise there is better enchanters like Sona who function in the role far better at the moment. Soraka got a major buff. Her ult now cleans grievous wounds of targets. This is massive, as not only does it guarantee you'll get full healing from your ultimate, but it also means you can use it as a way to remove grievous wounds from you or your teammates to fully benefit from your healing. In lane, often the only source from the enemies is Ignite, and being able to remove that is massive. This essentially forces your opponents to spend 800 gold on an Executioners because Ignite simply isn't enough anymore. Soraka was already a strong low elo performer, and this just makes it even better. Morgana is not a pick you always want, but in the right scenarios he's oppressive. The Black Shield shuts down a ton of engaged supports like Leona, Nautilus and Thresh, and the big thing is they buffed it to have a lower cooldown. It wasn't a massive buff, only 2 seconds at each level, but the biggest weakness of Morgana is being engaged on while your shield is on cooldown, and anything to shorten that window is a massive benefit. I still recommend you avoid picking her into mages, as they'll simply blast through your shield and poke you down, but she's looking to be a great counter pick on the patch to shut down all those pesky tank supports. And that's it for this patch. Hopefully this has been helpful in getting you up to speed on the meta. If you're interested in seeing the full low elo and high elo lists in one place, including C&D tiers, then head on over to mobalytics.gg where you can get even more info including counters, builds, tips, combos and more. Everything's just been revamped, so be sure to check it out. See you next time, and thanks for watching.